Hey man, it's me, Kevin Smith, Silent Bob from all those Jay and Silent Bob type pictures, man. And I'm breaking the silence to tell you that you're listening to the Buff and the Blazer podcast with Drew and Toddo. Enjoy the show, kids.
Hey, Toddo.
What's going on?
We got a podcast, The Buff and the Blazer. If I was a listener, where would I go to find more?
You can check us out on our website, thebuffandtheblazer.com. Drew over there writes a article that goes along with every single episode.
You can find all kinds of little extras on the articles, and you can listen to the podcast right there. Also, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And, of course, we're on Twitter at Buff and Blazer. Follow us there.
Get those clicks, people.
The Buff and the Blazer.
Welcome to episode 60 of the Buff and the Blazer podcast, the show where we break down, discuss old movies, new movies, everything in between. I'm Drew, and as always, I'm here with my good pal, Mr. El Toddo.
What's up, dude?
How's it going, man?
Going good?
We got a nice long weekend.
Yeah.
Kind of veg out and got some watching in again, as always. And on episode 60, we're going to be breaking down a little film called The Dig that was just recently released on Netflix. And it's directed by Simon Stone, and it's our second Carey Mulligan film, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah. Just
All
a couple
right.
of weeks ago.
Quite a bit different from the other film that we reviewed of hers.
Yeah.
Like total opposite side of the spectrum. But it's an interesting watch, I think. It deals with a few topics that we're fairly familiar with. It's a genre, I think, that I don't know if we've tackled a whole bunch of sort of romantic dramas.
The
On our show.
romantic drama, I like that.
Yeah.
Wrapped in a period.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's just jump right in. What did you think after watching The Dig?
A little bit of both ends. So I enjoyed that the story was different and more of like not really a hero or any type of that narrative. And I enjoyed the period it takes place in, particularly because it's like a World War II story told from the periphery of the war, I guess.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting. And I enjoyed like the main driver of the storyline with the whole burial, the archaeological burial. It's pretty cool. And the other thing that was really strong was like the artistry of it. It was filmed like very artsy, right?
Yeah.
And then there were parts that kind of was just like, it was really dramatic. At times, I think quite overly dramatic. And the score was just like, beat you over the head dramatic.
I thought of you so hard when I was listening to the score of this movie.
But all in all, it was pretty entertaining for how slow it was. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Right? Like they had a couple of kind of moments, emotional moments, I guess they would be, or big kind of peaks of the story. But it was still pretty boring and pretty long. It was like right at the 2-hour mark.
Yeah.
But the acting was really good, and yeah, it was kind of good on some notes, bad on some notes for me. What about you?
Okay, all right. I think I'm kind of with you there. It's got about an 87% on Rotten Tomatoes, which kind of shocked me with this kind of movie. Because oftentimes when you have these historical, like romantic dramas, a lot of times they get beaten over the head and they just get crapped on. And so I was a bit skeptical. And then when I saw the score, I was like, wow, okay, let's see what this is all about. And then a lot of people were talking about it. So I kind of it was on my radar just from the word of mouth. So I was like, okay, this would probably be a good one for us to do. And like you, I think it has a lot going for it in some ways, but then in others, it's a bit of a slog. It's a bit slow. It does get a bit overly romantic and dramatic at times. Melodramatic, maybe, I guess you could say, in some parts. But I don't think it was so much where it turned me off of anything. It was just kind of...
Right up to that line.
Yeah, right up to the line. And then I think when you read a synopsis about a film like this or even watch the trailer, you're kind of expecting that anyways. And I feel like they could have gone even worse with the melodrama. And I think they kind of skirted this edge where they didn't go too far, but if you're not into this kind of stuff, it may seem a bit high up, I guess, on the drama meter for you. But I did love the way the film looked, and I think that has a lot to do with keeping you engaged. It's really, really beautiful, and I don't know if they shot it on the English countryside, but it looks gorgeous.
Sure looks like it.
Yeah, you got I love anytime they're shooting and the sun's like just setting or coming up, and you got those golden like hues shining through the lens of the camera, and I just love looking down the English countryside on all those beautiful landscape shots. And I thought, like you said, the artistry of the film was just really beautiful and really, really lovely. And I really dig the actors in this film. Like Ralph Fiennes, he's one of my favorite all-time actors. He's so good anytime he's in a role. And Carey Mulligan, we know what kind of acting chops she has. And Lily James was another one that I was surprised to see in this film. She has somewhat of like not so much a secondary character, but she's definitely not the main character in the film. And it was kind of nice to see her in a role like that. So the film's filled with a bunch of good acting talent. And overall, I think I enjoyed it, but it wasn't a film that blew me away by any means. It was just a good, I guess, clean film, I guess you could say, to say in terms of its audience, like who could watch it. Anyone. It's rated PG-13, and I don't think it ever really goes beyond that in terms of anything too shocking.
No.
But yeah, it's definitely, I think, a family film that anyone can watch. And I don't know, I thought it was really simply constructed in terms of like the story. Nothing too crazy or plot twists going on. It just it's a very straightforward story, and that was the idea that I got.
It's like a character struggle on a bunch of different levels, a bunch of different characters wrapped into kind of this foundation of a archaeological dig.
Yeah.
Main plot line, right? But
yeah.
the real meat of the movie are, I guess, the real kind of emotional drivers of the movie are all the characters involved with the dig.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting in that respect, but I don't know. I got lost in there midway. As soon as it started to really dip more into the characters and less about what they found, like basically once they figure out what it is they've dug up,
yeah,
that whole thing kind of like steps out of the spotlight of the movie and doesn't really have any sort of, magical culmination.
Well, I guess that's like the driver of the drama, right?
Yeah.
Like once they figure out what they're dealing with, then boom, the drama sets in.
Yeah.
All kind of
now
because
it's
of that.
all about who's in love with who and who's going off to war and
yeah, and who's in charge,
who's dying.
Yeah. One thing I will say is, so this is based on, I guess it's based on true events.
Yeah, it has to be.
Yeah, so it's based on true events. But I was reading that they did take a few liberties, obviously, to spruce it up for Hollywood.
Probably all of the love stories.
Probably. But in terms of the people involved and the dig itself, the excavation going on, at least from what I read, they said it was pretty accurate. Even the way they designed the excavation itself and the way they made it look, they said that it was pretty accurate in terms of what was actually there. So that was cool to know. But yeah,
we can get into that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. But I think this is going to be an interesting episode because the story is so much intertwined with the character drama, and the character, I guess the inner character of each person. So it's totally fine, I think, if we go back and forth between talking about a particular character and how they're dealt with or how they deal with the plot elements of the story. But let me just ask you, what were your impressions, I guess? I want to ask you, since we saw Carey Mulligan in the last film we reviewed, what did you think of her this time around in this movie?
It's quite the different age range. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know how much older she's meant to be in this movie, but she certainly seems quite a bit different. And maybe that's because of the period, too, right?
Yeah.
But no, she was completely polar opposite character-wise
Yeah, for
in
sure.
this than she was in Promising Young Woman, which is more of a modern, totally different style of movie. But I thought she was really believable in this, particularly her struggle, her physical struggle.
It's interesting because she's still really believable in this film, but the range of emotions in this movie are very, very squashed down compared to what she played in Promising Young Woman, I think.
Well, yeah, let's dig into that a bit. So in Promising Young Woman, she's like the depressed, vengeful.
She's almost playing like two different characters. They're so different.
Yeah, she's like vengeful and depressed and wants to come to peace with what she's lived through.
Yeah.
And in this movie, it's totally the opposite end of depressed. It's like she's at peace with her fate and is totally eyed towards the future, not the past. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And so before we say anything more, do we want to kind of keep this in terms of spoilers?
What do we do? How about this? So let's dig in deep on the plot and stuff, but we won't give away the character
Okay.
kind of endings.
Sure. All right.
I guess.
That's fair. So you've been warned. We're going to go into plot a little bit. All right, well, let's start then. Were you familiar with this story at all? Like this excavation? Have you heard anything about this? Because I hadn't.
I've read a bunch about certain Anglo-Saxon burials being dug up in England. It's happened a bunch of different times. But this one in particular, no.
All right.
And I'm looking at pictures. There's pictures of it online.
Yeah, the actual site.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks dope.
Yeah.
It looks amazing.
It looks pretty cleaned up, too.
And it's totally... I like the theme of the movie. So one of the major plot drivers is the excavator guy.
Right. Basil Brown.
Basil Brown.
That's Ralph Fiennes.
So he's like a archaeologist that's just been digging stuff up his whole life. Didn't go to any schooling or anything. Doesn't have the credentials.
Sounds familiar.
But knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, the way he opens this thing up, if you had gridded that out and started, randomly going down in spots, it could have been disastrous based on the shape of the ship that's in the ground.
Yeah.
But
well, it almost is, right? At one point.
Yeah. But anyway, what I'm saying is like there's a big theme in the movie that's specific to archaeology about like people that just dig versus the people that got all of their experience in a school.
Right.
And this type of excavation that he performs probably wouldn't have been the way that a professional did it, right?
Yeah.
Because he finds the tip of the ship and then just kind of follows it, which is awesome.
Yeah.
But it's not like gridded out and stuff,
Yeah.
I don't know where I'm going with this, but that theme is like a driver, right? This guy getting the acknowledgement for his skills, even though he doesn't have all the degrees and stuff.
Right.
Is a big part of, I think, the true part of the story, I imagine, right?
Yeah. No, that all seems
it at the end.
That all seems totally based in history. And I guess at the end of the film, they were saying that he'd never got any kind of acknowledgement of even
until recently.
Until very recently. What did you think of Ralph Fiennes' performance in the character? Was that did you buy that he was the old and gruff excavator guy that's been doing it for a long time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he played it really well. And it doesn't seem very glamorous.
No.
His whole he doesn't seem to be very happy with his personal life. He's just kind of obsessed with digging up old shit, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, I was also reading that the whole thing with his bicycle, that was, I guess, a true thing. He got everywhere on his bike. And so it's kind of cool to see him throw in little bits of reality into that.
And that's a very real character in the archaeology world.
Yeah, for sure.
The old dude that didn't go to school, but he fucking kicks ass and can dig up anything, and he's one of the best you've ever met, you know?
Yeah, I know
That's a
someone who
very
comes
true
to mind.
character.
I know you do too.
But like that struggle is what I was getting at as part of the plot line.
Right.
The struggle between the academic world kind of moving in and taking credit and control of all of this stuff versus the person who really cares about it and wants to just dig it up the right way, right?
Right. There's actually, you reminded me of two things I want to talk about. One of them was this idea of legacy, and I think legacy versus purpose is kind of a theme that they play with in this film. And it's almost like from the beginning when he makes the discovery and then things kind of end up in like academic hands and you have a new power coming in to take over the project. It's almost like he gets wrapped up in this thing with legacy almost, and it causes him to leave the project. But then once he speaks with his wife, she kind of reminds him about, she gives him the talk and is like, remember what you told me about why you even care about this stuff and why you got into it? And I think he has a little bit of a change, not so much that he always felt that way and then he needed his wife to bring him back, but it kind of gives you the sense of why he got into it in the first place. And she says that he was all about digging up this stuff to give people a connection to their past and to their heritage, which is, you know, the noble aspect, I think, of archaeology. And once he gets that, he goes back to the excavation and is totally like almost just the crew chief, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
But he doesn't get any kind of recognition or anything, even while working and coming back to the project. So it was interesting to see that.
Yeah, and it's an interesting look at ego in the scientific world in general.
Yeah.
And I think he kind of comes to the realization that what's important is the find, not
Right.
who found it, right? That's
Yeah.
what really matters. And that still plagues everything.
Yeah, and that's the sense you get from him for most of the film, I think, is he's all concerned about the actual thing itself.
Yeah.
And even to his, I guess, detriment at the end, because he's almost forgotten until recently. So it shows you the kind of guy he is. He's all about what it is he's working with, all about the work itself.
But let me ask you a question as somebody who like reads this stuff and is in, aware of the archaeological world. What do you give a shit who found anything? Because I don't.
Yeah, I don't either.
I don't remember whose name it was.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's like the same attitude that he kind of has the realization with why he left, right? It's the same reason why the guy who showed up and took over everything that's not the part that's cool. The cool part is what's in the ground. He comes to that realization.
Yeah.
I think everybody should.
And I think a part of it has to do with, too, that the guy that they portray in the film that comes over to take the project over is kind of a pompous dick. He's just
Yeah.
one of those, like, you don't know anything because you never got a degree in it, and you shouldn't even be here.
And so much of it is, like, there's so many, like, sheep herders and agricultural dudes around the world that have, like, bumped into something and it's turned into this wild thing that some guy made his career off of.
Right.
But who cares? Like, it's about whatever was found, not who found it or whatever. Or who dug it up or whoever. Unless you fucked it up when you dug it up.
Right. And then the other thing I thought of that reminded me of you while watching this was there's a line in the beginning when Mrs. Pretty, who is Edith Pretty, Carey Mulligan's character, when she's kind of showing Basil the grounds and what they're dealing with, and she wants to excavate the big mound. She's like, I have a feeling about that one. Then he's like, well, if it were me, I wouldn't excavate that one. I'd excavate the other one. And he kind of goes into a reasoning as to why. And then he makes a comment about, he's all basically like, he's all, yeah, you have your feelings, but I have my data or something like that.
Yeah.
And then what's funny is that kind of gets flipped over because he realizes something and it causes him to want to excavate the bigger mound. And it just happens that the data ended up backing her feeling, I guess. But I thought that was just while it could have been a throwaway line, I thought that was interesting that they played with that a little bit.
I really enjoyed that whole beginning part of the movie and how they filmed that. Like getting to the site and then like walking around and him checking stuff out.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that. And then like the initial trench that he digs into one of the mounds.
Yeah.
The whole time I was just like, that's dangerous as fuck. Like right away. Like dangerous as fuck. You got to get some shoring up in there. But do you think the little accident that happens with his sidewall
Oh, dude.
is his epiphany into digging the other mound because he realized how easily these peripheries were eroded?
Yeah. And that's
like
why I
that.
thought it wasn't just a complete throwaway, like, oh, let's just add a dramatic moment here.
No, it had something to do
Yeah.
with
hmm
the soil.
It
you know?
sucks how he found out about it, but yeah, I was watching that, man, and he was like, what, completely covered in
Yeah.
that soil? And I'm like, there's no way he survived that
No.
when he's like 2-3 feet under. But anyway, it's a little side note. Well, let me
I
ask
had
you.
something.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
That's okay.
I forgot what I was going to say.
We'll see if it
but-
comes back.
Oh,
Did
I got it. So
Okay.
like did you notice all of like the subtle racism, I guess it would be considered in the English mentality that it's an Anglo-Saxon ship and not a Viking ship,
Yeah.
and how he's constantly like these people had culture and they weren't marauding barbarians and like totally dissing all the Norse
Yeah.
because it's a couple centuries older.
Oh my gosh.
I thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah, that was funny. Yeah, I'm not very familiar with that kind of archaeology, but I thought that was pretty funny.
I'm not either, but
What did you think about the find itself, like the way they showed it on screen?
it looks just like the pictures of the real one.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
I did a little comparison too. It looks pretty accurate.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. They didn't dig too deep into anything they dug up,
Yeah.
but there's a couple of pictures of some of the artifacts online too. And they're
Yeah,
pretty
some
cool,
pretty sweet
dude.
stuff.
But it was
yeah.
super interesting the way they dug it out.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know, and I guess a lot of that stuff ended up in the hands of the British Museum.
Yeah,
That's what they
That's
said.
what it says at the end of the movie.
But yeah, pretty cool to have some of that stuff in your backyard. Although the pretty mansion it's seems pretty nice to have that giant piece of land.
I got a question for you.
Yeah,
At
what's
what
up?
point is it cooler being there unknown to being in the museum?
Yeah, it's
Because like that's the argument for, because there's other mounds there, right, that they haven't dug up.
right. Looks like it.
Yeah, where does that break in the coolness? It's like he dug one up. You know, there's maybe two more there or something.
Yeah.
How much value does it have staying there, right? I
Yeah,
guess the
yeah.
question is, the stuff that you see in the museum is very cool, but does it carry the same weight as it does in that location
Yeah.
where it was found?
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, and that's one of those questions that you can always ask, regardless of where it is or what it is. But yeah, I'll be on the lookout next time I see a lump of anything going on. Be like, oh, there could be a...
You find that over here, and you will definitely be famous.
Yeah, and that's when I'm all about legacy. Like, get my name in all the books. I want I want all the rights. Anyway, so the story, like we said, he makes his discovery, and then it starts flipping the switch into the drama element. Out of all of the character stories that we get in the film, which one do you think did the best job of giving you a peek into the particular character it's talking about? Like, was there anyone that stuck out to you the most, that you identified with most, or that you maybe believed more than the other? I'd say maybe there's like three main ones, right? You have Mrs. Pretty with all her stuff going on. You have Basil Brown, and he has some of his kind of like inner struggles. And then you have Lily James's character, Peggy Piggott, and she's dealing with kind of her own drama. So let's start with those three, maybe, or pick from those three. Out of those three, which kind of was the least sort of cringeworthy, I guess?
I mean, cringeworthy, I don't know if
Maybe
it's
not
what it is.
cringeworthy, but the least maybe melodramatic.
Well, in that case, Lily
Okay.
James' character, Peggy, in terms of melodramatic.
Okay.
But like, they're all believable. particularly in their role, and they all can hit a lot of different people from a relatable level.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess if I'd probably like Basil if I had like connection with, because I know a bunch of dudes like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, they're all believable in their struggles.
Okay.
And it kind of hits a ton of different emotional notes on that level, right? There's like the existentialism side of it. There's like the legacy side of it. There's the young love side of it.
Yeah.
And then there's like, yeah, they hit so many different levels with all these different characters.
Yeah.
And they're all pretty believable. And it's all, the one driver of all of that is like the exterior stress that the brink of World War II is putting on everybody.
Yeah, and that was kind of an interesting touch, I think, because it kind of, it's this, there's like this underlying thing throughout the entire film, this,
Anxious.
yeah, that's a
Background
good,
anxiousness.
right. It's like a tension almost that is played from beginning to end. And I don't know specifically how they were able to have that come across, but you feel it throughout the entire film. And it's always there. And I guess you have like little scenes that cut to maybe listening to the radio and hearing the broadcasts and stuff like that. But the brink of war is very much present from start to finish, I'd say. And it gives it kind of a weird vibe as you're watching the film, always being there. And then it kind of, as it gets closer to Germany invading Poland, I guess that's, well, they invade Poland in the film. And then once it reaches the point where they officially enter into the war, it kind of explodes at the end. But what was I getting at?
It drives all of their decision making,
Right.
kind of, I think. Well,
Yeah.
maybe not all of them, but
It does affect some characters very directly.
yeah.
But for you, so Basil Brown, I guess, was that the one that affected you the most in terms of the three big ones?
I mean, affected is a bit of a strong of a word. I wasn't really super connected to anything in the movie because it was so overdramatic. And at that point, you can't connect. At least I can't, because it's just like, oh, God, dude, take it easy. Take it easy with the sad violin.
Literally.
Yeah. But I said it before. That's when it kind of lost me, right? After the part that we kind of talked about, all the drama with the digging and the actual archaeology site. As soon as it went kind of totally away from that and to all the character play,
Yeah.
I was just like, all right,
Yeah.
get it over with.
Okay, so is it fair to say then that the resolution of the story was pretty predictable
Yeah.
for you? At least not being aware of the actual story, the real life story.
Yeah, it went exactly where you know it's going to go.
Yeah.
All in the span of a few weeks.
Right.
But that story, so it's going to be hard to say this without giving it away, but the situation between Stuart Piggott and Peggy Preston, right? They're like newlyweds
Yeah.
on the dig working together.
Well, I guess she's a Piggott too.
Yeah.
Peggy Piggott.
The way they weave her story in and the way it wraps up is like really trying to grab all of the heartless romantics out of the crowd. Right? Because it kind of is a good outcome on both ends
Yeah.
of their two characters.
Uh-huh.
But it goes exactly where you know it's going to go, and it seems like really, really overdramatic.
It does. There's nothing,
but there's
I guess.
the war driving that in the background,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, at least with their storyline, there was nothing unpredictable about that. It was very
No, and
much,
it kind of comes in late and takes over.
Yeah, she becomes
Comes in like end of second act and takes over.
right. Yeah, she gets a lot more screen time in the second half of the film. Interesting little movie tidbit. So Ben Chaplin plays Stuart Piggott, and then Lily James plays Peggy Piggott, his wife in the film. They were in a film around 2000, somewhere in the teens, early teens, because Lily James played Cinderella, the live-action Disney film Cinderella, and he plays her father in that movie.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so it's like, oh, it's interesting to see Cinderella kiss her dad. So yeah, you notice that too, like with a lot of these films and TV shows that have a lot of British acting talent. A lot of them pop up in the same, like in a bunch of different things. You'll see the same group of actors everywhere, just because I guess the acting community over there is a bit smaller. So like a lot of these actors I've seen pop up in like BBC masterpiece shows and stuff like that. So it's kind of interesting.
It's a very British movie.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, I like that whole aspect.
It is. So
What'd you think of Ken Stott as the asshole archaeologist from the
I thought he was
museum?
I thought he was perfect
Right?
in the role, right? He comes over and he's real hard-nosed, and he waves his whatever it is, his ego and his credentials in the face of everyone there, and he's not shy about it.
Yeah, I love how Basil puts him in his place. Like right away, he's like, "Your fat ass isn't getting in here," and walking around. It's funny.
Yeah.
And I liked how they had the little jabs where Charles Phillips, right? That's his name.
Yeah,
in
Charles
the movie.
Phillips.
Where he has to like acknowledge that Basil knows what he's doing and he's got it figured out because he thinks it's older than it is. And
Yeah.
he finds a little coin and proves it.
Right.
I thought that was sweet.
That was cool. It's a nice little moment for Basil Brown.
And there's got to be some jabbing in there at the British Museum, right? As the point of this movie.
Yeah.
Like somebody's grinding an axe from a long time ago. Because the British Museum has done, they have a wicked museum, but
They have a
getting
pretty
all this
shady
stuff
past, though.
Isn't that cool,
It's like, yeah, let's just rip that obelisk out of Egypt and bring it back home. So, all kinds of shadiness.
Did you like Johnny Flynn?
Johnny Flynn.
He played
Oh, yeah, the cousin.
Rory.
Yeah. At first, I thought he was one of the pilots out of, the Christopher Nolan film, Dunkirk. I thought that was him, one of the RAF pilots from Dunkirk, but I guess not. I liked his character. He was kind of the perfect foil for Peggy Pigott. Like as soon as I saw him and he gets into the excavation and he's taking pictures of people and you see him zoom in with this, you see the camera like change the viewpoint and you see Peggy Pigott in his lens. I was like, all right, I know where this is going.
Did you enjoy all of that young love stuff?
To a degree.
Subtleties.
To a degree. I don't think it's completely like awful or anything. And it'll get certain people interested.
No, I bet some people love it.
Yeah, for sure.
The romance crowd loves that.
I've seen a lot worse, I'll say that, in a film. But yeah, I thought their chemistry was pretty decent. Like whenever they're on screen together, I thought they were pretty good together. Trying to see. I liked Monica Dolan, who played Mae Brown.
Yeah.
She was great. And they have this weird relationship, right? It's almost like in the beginning, well, it's kind of cool because she gives him all this space. She just knows him so well. She's like, I got to let him do his thing. And at first I wasn't sure if she was just like a lifelong friend or something, but then you find out that they're married and it's like, wow, okay, they really understand each other, and she must have a shit ton of patience because she just lets him go off on weeks just doing this stuff. And I liked how the two actors played off of that dynamic of like the old married couple, but there was like this real genuine quality to it, and you, at least for me anyway, I liked how their relationship was so comfortable, I guess, and how comfortable it was portrayed.
Yeah, she totally knows how obsessed he is.
Yeah.
And she's cool with him doing it, which is kind of a nice way of looking at it.
Right.
And a nice way of not having a conflict there, too, right? Because you could have had another little emotional conflict of the movie tucked into that story. But instead, it's just like full-blown support and acknowledgement of his kind of purpose, I guess it is.
Yeah. I guess that element of the movie, their relationship, that was one of my favorite parts of the film. I really liked whenever they were together. was just fun watching them interact. And then who was the actor, the young actor that plays Mrs. Pretty's son?
I don't know.
He was cool too. Like I
He
liked
was
his
good.
performance. And anytime he was on screen with Basil, I thought that was a nice little moment because you get to see he's without a father, and Basil kind of brings him in and lets him see like the excavation and teaches him about astronomy. So that was kind of a sweet relationship going on too.
Yeah, that kid has like a pretty heavy scene
Yeah,
with Basil.
right.
I
Yeah,
can't find him, man.
Yeah, and I don't think they even have a picture of him on, at least on IMDb. But yeah, it's safe to say, I think, that
Everybody's believable.
everyone's really good at what they're doing. No glaring holes anywhere, really.
Can't knock the acting or the characters really at all.
No, not at all. But yeah, I think that was kind of good. I don't think we spoiled too much there.
Try not to.
Trying not to. Let's get into the filmmaking and all of the technical elements of the movie, which I thought were probably some of the most enjoyable parts of the film.
For sure.
I can't remember what episode it was or what movie it was, but I was saying something about how when the cinematography is so nice and well done, it's like watching a moving magazine.
Ah,
And this film is exactly like that. I think from some of the opening shots all the way to the very end, there's something magical about that camera and what it's capturing. And it has to do with, the landscape. The landscape is really, really beautiful. But then the way that they frame it, I noticed that, so a lot of times people have this idea of home video footage versus cinematic looking footage. And I've come to notice that a lot of that has to do with this shallow depth of field thing where like you have your character in focus and then everything else is kind of out of focus in the background. And a lot of people attribute that to like high quality cinema grade footage. But I noticed that in this film, a lot of the lenses they're using, you get both. You get that the background and foreground being in focus and the subject in the frame in focus too. And it gives it this really nice like sense of space. So you get an idea of where they are. And
like deeper dimensions.
yeah,
Like almost like a lot of it's like GoPro style a little bit.
kind of, yeah. And you get a really good sense of the space that they're walking around in. And it really helps set up like the archaeological site itself. And I thought that with the colors, the way like the greens came out in the hillside and the golden hues of the sun, it was gorgeous, man.
It was gorgeous, and I feel like almost very little of this movie was set, right? Like
Yeah.
so much of it was shot wherever it was shot at this manor or whatever.
Yeah, that's what it seemed like to me.
And they obviously built the whole dig setup,
Yeah.
which I think is really cool.
Yeah, for sure.
But there was like certain moments in it when I got vibes of like Midsummer. Not from like a horror
Oh,
standpoint,
yeah,
but just
yeah.
like some of the stuff with all of the open fields and the space.
For sure. I guess even some of the colors at times.
And the amount of rain, some of those rain scenes were so wicked.
Yeah.
It just looked like it's pouring.
Yeah. No, I love that. And then there were also a lot of scenes where you'd get these really low angle shots and just have open sky behind either Mrs. Pretty and her son or Basil. And you just get these really panoramic views with a character off on the side of the frame, just emphasizing the space. I love that about this. I noticed that their shooting style was all about emphasizing the area and the space.
And there was a lot of like camera going up
Oh,
and,
okay.
and panning out, right?
Yeah.
And getting elevation to it. Like they shot a bunch of the actual dig site from these cool kind of vertical angles.
Yeah.
And then when the planes would fly by, it was like the camera was like going up into the sky. Did you
Yeah.
notice that a
Yeah,
couple of times?
Yeah, I did.
Like it was going from ground perspective where they were like up into the sky while the plane was going by.
Yeah.
Like I thought those were super cool shots.
Those are really cool shots. And I guess that goes back to, again, that idea of the brink of war being a constant presence throughout the film. There's another good example of that. And I guess the other thing I really liked was, so the real life location of this archaeological site, it's it's pretty close up onto, what is that? Like a river?
It's like a tidal zone, isn't it?
Okay, yeah, something like that.
Let's get the.
But you really get the way they shot it in this film, and I don't even know if they shot it close to at all the real location, but that's in there, and you totally get the sense that it's close to the water, and that's kind of an important aspect of the archaeology, I guess, of where it's located, because that's where they would have dragged that boat
Up from the river?
Yeah, up from the river. Yeah, I'm trying to find where they actually shot it.
It's right on the east coast, right across the channel from like Amsterdam.
Okay. So it looks like they shot in Surrey. They did shoot in Suffolk. I think that's where it takes place.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at.
Yeah. Cool. So yeah, maybe they did shoot it pretty close to home then.
It all felt so legit.
Yeah. I don't know what it is too, but something about anytime you have the English countryside on camera, something really peaceful and beautiful about it that you just really don't get anywhere else.
So all of the indoor stuff, do you think that was probably sets?
I would think so. Nowadays, like anytime you're shooting indoors, unless you have a reason to shoot in the actual building itself, they often won't. And it's only because they can control the environment exactly the way they want it. So they can control sound, they can control lighting in any way that they want. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if those were studio shots on a set with the interiors, but everything else seems like it's completely legit and on location.
I like those old cars.
Yeah, the cars are sweet. I liked Rory's motorcycle.
Mm-hmm.
That was cool. But yeah, it was all just really nice to see. I don't know, I think the last couple of films we've been watching, there's a lot of like on-location shooting, and I love on-location shooting.
It's way better.
Yeah, it just gives a sense of reality to whatever story you're trying to tell. So, favorite shot, real quick. Is there one in particular that you had, or just kind of more general?
The first time that Mrs. Pretty takes Basil down to the site.
Okay.
When they're walking around the mounds and checking stuff out. That's like my favorite sequence in the movie.
Yeah.
They really captured that kind of feel for the first time.
I love when the camera's kind of moving around and you get them in frame, but then it's unveiling the landscape at the same time.
Yeah.
With all of the lighting coming in, that's, yeah.
It's like super windy.
Really beautiful.
Yeah.
For me, I think my favorite shot in the film is when Basil makes the discovery, and then he goes and gets Mrs. Pretty, and he's like, you might want to come see this. And then they slowly kind of walk over the mound, and then the camera reveals what it is that he dug up.
And it's only like the tip,
Right.
That
Yeah.
one, before they have it all opened up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just like the tip of the ship.
Yeah. But it's just like, just in that one little moment, like the buildup in that little shot is enough to get you, to kind of pull you in and get you excited. And so I really like that. But yeah, I the cinematography in this film is one of the more enjoyable ones that I think we've done. I really, really liked it.
I wish they would have explained the interior chamber a little better
Oh, yeah.
of the dig.
Where they started finding the really cool stuff.
Yeah. Because that's kind of hard to like visualize.
Yeah.
But if you think about it like the ship, you can see the outline of the ship, but there was like a A-frame shaped roof over the middle.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where everything was. And then once that collapsed and filled in with everything, that's what they find everything in. Because it's not like there was a chamber deeper than the ship.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So I wish they would have explained that a little better. Because it's kind of hard to like visualize.
Yeah.
Because they do address that there's a burial in there. But they don't. They almost give the impression like the burial is below the ship, which it's not.
And that's the
You know what I'm
impression I
saying?
got.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. So everything would have been kind of above the floating, at least seaworthy portion of the ship itself.
Yeah, think of the ship as like
A floating house.
having
almost.
a A-frame teepee across the middle.
Yeah.
Or A-frame, wooden structure across the middle with the front and back still exposed, right? And just deck out there. But then in the middle, that's where everything is buried. And then it was probably, buried from that point. And then over time, that whole A-frame would have collapsed.
Right.
Right? And they didn't show any of the remains in the movie at all. They didn't even touch that side of it.
Yeah.
That's why they're like just finding stuff randomly
Right.
in that whole kind of bottom of the center of the ship.
Right. Yeah, that is interesting.
They kind of touch on a topic of ownership of the remains too, right?
Yeah,
They,
and
they
that could have
kinda
been
dabble into that a little bit,
that could have been a whole other like
which is a complicated issue.
yeah. And I was kind of thinking about how their laws and regs work over there. It's pretty interesting.
I get the sense like, because I remember reading a story back in the early 2000s of a dude that found an Anglo-Saxon hoard of awesomeness, right? Treasure, essentially. And he sold it, I believe, because it was on his property. He sold it all to the British Museum.
Oh wow.
But I imagine in this area, just after, the British had been pot hunting the planet for a couple of centuries,
Yeah.
that if they found anything this awesome in England, it was just like automatically property of the crown, I imagine. I don't know what it's like nowadays.
Yeah, I don't know. No idea.
In America, it's complicated as fuck.
Yeah. Maybe they'll do the Dig America.
Mm-mm. Nope.
No thanks. All right. Let's get on to our last and, for me, most interesting part of the show.
Most interesting.
When we talk about the score of a particular film. But this one, specifically, you'd given a little bit of a spoiler in the beginning about your thoughts on the score.
It's just too much.
All right, so you weren't a huge fan of it, obviously.
I
could've
wasn't
seen
a
that.
huge fan, but I get why it's so overbearing, because it also plays into like the background war theme of the anxiety. So everything that's happening to all these people is like feels very final,
Yeah.
right? Because they're all like scared of World War II
Mhm.
popping off, and justifiably so. But it was just too much for me. Even the trailer, like I noticed it in the trailer, and was just like, oh man.
Yeah, the trailer
Just
I couldn't
plays
stand.
into the melodrama, you know?
Yeah, I couldn't stand the track for the trailer.
It was just too much, man.
Yeah, a little too front and center for you.
The whole time.
I get you.
What about you?
For me, it probably didn't bother me as much, but it is kind of in your face, and I'm so used to these kinds of stories in this genre, and that's just part of it. It's become a massive part of this type of quote-unquote story. So yeah, I guess just going into it expecting it a little bit, I wasn't as put off by it at all. But not one of my favorites by any means. It's just kind of, that's what I would expect a film like this to sound like. More or less.
Yeah.
Um,
And for me, that's a bad thing.
yeah, I get you. Well, I think we did a pretty good job of not spoiling too much.
We'll see.
Not too bad.
Who knows?
Who knows? Well, let's get into our love-hates. Let's start wrapping up here. Let's start with you. What do you got?
I love the archaeology side of it.
Mhm.
It's really cool. And it's interesting what types of archaeology make the headlines, and there's so many different types. And this is obviously like blockbuster type archaeology. But I like the theme that kind of Basil plays.
Mm-hmm.
And it can't all be this sexy, but he's done all of it. All the digs, and they're even talking about like a Roman villa in this movie, about like, oh well, we find those all the time. This is better, even though it's not as old. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because this would be like a couple hundred years after
Uh-huh.
Roman. But I think, yeah. But that's what I loved about the movie, is kind of the side of archaeology that they showed,
Cool.
and seeing all of the the racism on the British side about who it was funny. And what I hated about it was just how freaking deep all the other character stories went in. To be honest, like that's
Okay.
what totally lost me.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
All right, cool.
because
cool.
it even became about like Basil in some ways, right? Like in his legacy, like we talked about earlier.
Yeah. I almost
But
felt
yeah, that's just
yeah,
too
it was.
much character.
I felt like it was kind of his story after
It
watching
was.
it. Yeah. Let's see. For me, I also liked the archaeology quite a bit. It was cool to see. But I think I loved more than anything the look of this film. It's gorgeous, and I just enjoy watching it, looking at it. It's visually interesting and visually beautiful, and that's going to go a long way with me on a lot of these films. And I think in terms of the love story, the inner character stories that are told in the second half, maybe they were a bit over the top at some points, but at the same time, they're kind of these real world struggles. Like they're things that emotions and circumstances that people experience every day.
A lot of relatability.
Yeah, and I think that's why I can't knock it too much, is because they weren't telling something completely outlandish. And even if they took liberties and changed the backgrounds of some of these real life people to give you a somewhat interesting story, I think any changes they may have made were not so over the top where it becomes fantasy or it becomes something of like a Cinderella story. So I was okay with that. I think the fact that this story is kind of, like we said, it's kind of Basil's story in a lot of senses. It deals with him very specifically, but it does also deal with Mrs. Pretty because this is her land and her kind of project. But the fact that they introduce Basil and you get into Mrs. Pretty, and on top of that you're getting into Peggy Piggott, I think that's a lot to do and a lot to get into in one film. And I think they did a decent job of getting into all three of the heads of those characters. So if there was maybe one thing I could criticize, maybe stick to 2 at the most and get more into that rather than kind of spreading around your magnifying glass to a bunch of different people.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Maybe focus your story a little bit more. But having said that, I don't think that concentrating on the 3 of them made it so messy to where you had a story that didn't make sense or a story that completely left out an important part of a character's arc or whatever. I just feel like maybe it would have been kind of neater and simpler and maybe even more effective to deal with one of those characters rather than 3 at the same time.
It's like you're drowning in emotional depth.
Yeah.
With all of the stories.
Right. And like the fact that Basil Brown, they acknowledge the fact that he was never mentioned in that whole story. The film could have centered around him the whole time. And I think it would have been just as interesting, although you wouldn't have been able to get that romance element. So I understand why they do it, to attract, a particular
Gotta check
audience.
that box, dude.
Yeah, you got to. So I guess there isn't really a hate for me. It's just kind of like, I see your audience, but I think you could have told a more compelling story if you would have maybe not gone that route to appease them and just tell the story I think that is worth telling, which is the story of Basil Brown. But what do I know?
No, I get what you're saying there.
What do I know?
And that was a good way of putting it, right? There's so many deep storylines with so many characters that it's almost too much.
Yeah.
But I don't know how deep you would have want to gone into Basil. I don't think he's that interesting.
Oh man, I want to see like what he eats for breakfast. I want to see.
I would like to see maybe some flashbacks.
Yeah.
Something he's digging up.
I want to know what time he wakes up in the morning, his workout routine. All right, man. Well, let's get out of here. But first, let's slap a score onto this thing. What do you got?
I will give it a bong load for the cinematography and all that. It was beautiful. Bong load for the acting and the characters, even though some were a little too deep, but that's totally worthy.
Okay.
I'm going to give them a bong load for story. I didn't enjoy it that much.
Yeah.
But it was legit and pretty complex, even though none of it was very twisty-turvy or anything. It was all very predictable, but they got a lot in there, all based around this one dig, which is good and creative. I'm not going to give it a point for the score. It's fucking over the top. Beating you over the head and made it way more dramatic than for my taste. And then I I'll give it a half for the feels because the subject matter had me interested quite a bit. So yeah, 3.5 bong loads.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Cool. So for me, it gets a point for story because I think it was an interesting one and a compelling one. It definitely gets a point for acting because I thought all the performances were great and believable.
Mm-hmm.
It definitely gets a full point for cinematography. That was probably my favorite part of the film. I'm also going to withdraw my point for score because it was just completely predictable and boring. And sorry to say that, but yeah, I'm pulling my point from score. And then I'm also going to give it half a point for because I don't love this film, but there was enough there to keep me engaged to watch it. And maybe even enough for me to recommend it to someone else. So that leaves me at 3.5 buckets of popcorn too. So I'm also.
Would you recommend it?
I think I would. If you're into dramas, if you're into romance stories, and even for people who like, a cool story that has something to do with archaeology and finding cool stuff, I think there's something you can get out of this film. And then especially if you're into Ralph Fiennes or Carey Mulligan or Lily James, this is a film I think that's worth watching because the performances are so good.
Yeah, performances are good. It's a good hangover movie, I think.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
It's a good
it's really mellow, couch. Right?
Yeah, it's really mellow and really pretty to look at most of the time.
Yeah.
Doesn't make
absolutely.
you think too hard.
Right, and it's on
Especially
Netflix.
With some of the romance and stuff.
Yeah. So if you're one of the millions of subscribers on Netflix, give it a watch. It's on there. It's a Netflix production, I think, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's an original. So.
Well, they got that Skrilla. The freaking production value is awesome in it.
Yeah, for sure.
Beautiful.
So, very nice to look at. Well, that was episode 60 of The Buff and the Blazer, talking a little bit about The Dig. Hopefully we stayed far enough away from the spoilers, but enough to at least get you interested in maybe checking it out. And that's all we got. It's
not like there's a big reveal or anything.
Yeah, no one comes back from the dead.
From a spoiler standpoint.
Yeah, there's no invaders coming out anywhere.
Yeah.
It's very much a human story. But
it'd be crazy if the Germans bombed the dig and killed a bunch of people in the middle of it.
Oh, dude, could you imagine if they had a secret squad, special ops that came up through the water up into the dig, and then they had to the bed knobs and broomstick story where they have to animate a bunch of these old medieval armor suits and have them fight the Nazis.
That would have been a twist.
Just a little bit. I might have to go back and change my score.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyways, catch The Dig on Netflix. I think it's worth a watch. And that's all we got for you. But till the next episode of the Buff and the Blazer podcast, I'm Drew with El Toddo, and we will catch you guys on the next one. Have a good week, people.
Peace.